Well, good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you this morning and are excited that you have chosen to join us to explore, wink, wink, a little bit about next year's Rural Life Sustainability Grant offering and what it could look like for your school or district. I want to note that on this slide, you see a QR code and a link for today's resources. And it looks like Teresa just dropped that in the chat as well. So we'll give everybody a chance to snap that or to click on the link in the chat. And again, we are excited that you have joined us. All righty, so I just want to welcome you this morning. My name is Bethany Fillers, and I'm the Director of Professional Learning for Rural Life. And like I said, we are excited that you've joined us this morning to explore a little bit more about next year's Sustainability Grant offering. Alongside me, not able to be here today, but is Brooke Dranen. She is going to serve as our Sustainability Grant coach. So she will be the coach from Rural Life who will support all of our schools who ultimately are awarded with a Sustainability Grant next year. Also, let's shout out to some other Niswonger Foundation staff, Rural Life staff, Dr. Richard Kitsmeller, who is our project director and, you know, in his spare time, the vice president of the Niswonger Foundation. John Payne, who is our director of technology, the man behind the scene making it happen. We appreciate all he does for us. And then Brittany Siebert, our communications and dissemination coordinator. Lots of communication from her and keep on the watch for more communication from her as we work our way through this process. All right, we're all pretty familiar with Zoom, but just the usual. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions throughout the session. Use the chat. If you need any assistance, just let us know and we'll help you out. Just real quickly, want to just kind of start by setting the sustainability grant offering within Rural Life, right? So Rural Life, our goal is to improve middle school literacy, and we do that by bringing together both research and best practice from the literacy field and the personalized learning field right here in the middle with our Rural Life work. And so our sustainability grant proposals and the work that we'll do in regard to this work will be situated right here within literacy and personalized learning. So our objectives for today, first, we are going to explore 3 focus areas of the Rural Life Sustainability Grant offering. Then we're going to understand more about the scope and possibilities of the types of grants that could be approved as a part of this project. And then become familiar with the sustainability grant proposal process and next steps. We're going to walk through the proposal document together and really talk about what happens between today's Explorers Workshop and when you submit your proposal. And we will, of course, have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. So again, feel free to ask questions throughout, but also jot them down if it's something you feel like you want to ask during our Q&A time at the end. All right, Dr. Kitsmeller would have loved to have been with us this morning, but he is in another meeting, but he did want to share a few words about the sustainability grant offering, really about its intention, its focus for this next year. So we're going to give him a chance to say those things now.
Hello, I'm Richard Kitsmeller, Project Director for Rural Life. The information we're sharing today, which we're calling the Explorers Workshop, is intended for those schools who have worked with us for 2 years previously in the Rural Life Project. When we started the Rural Life Project, we weren't sure where we would end up in 5 years, and none of us could have anticipated the kind of year we've had last year with the coronavirus situation and the upheaval that we've seen in our normal days at school and our normal life. So what we're trying to do is give you information for what we're calling sustainability grants with a slight twist on what we may have imagined a year ago. What has changed is that during the COVID year, we got additional information from the federal government concerning an extension possibility to the end of the project. And we got additional information from our external evaluator to help us through this research grant. So we have new information both from Washington, D.C., the funding source, and from our evaluators. I'd like to give you a brief update on that and then to frame what you'll be hearing from our other presenters today. What we have learned is that although we can get an extension on our grant, we cannot extend it for another full school year. So what we design in the sustainability grants will need to focus almost entirely on the 21-22 school year, the one that will be starting in August. There is some ability to go a few months perhaps into the next school year, the fall semester, but we need to be thinking about what can we accomplish in the next school year in our sustainability grants. The research design also has been changed, that our sustainability schools and our new treatment schools are both going to be compared to schools from across the state of Tennessee. They will be matched anonymously with other schools from across the state that are similar in demographics, size, and student achievement. So there will be a research component to what we do with the sustainability grants, as well as a research component to what we do with the treatment schools. But so what we will be asking to do, our rural life sustainability schools to do, is probably a little more organized and a little more cohesive, a little more group oriented than the sustainability grants we announced a year ago at the start of the last school year, the one that was interrupted so drastically with the coronavirus. So if you listen carefully, you will hear that there will be 3 focus areas. There will be an increased emphasis on not just a few teachers in the school, but extending the learning to your entire school, and also schools sharing with other schools so we can synthesize what we've learned from our project so that we can share with each other what we've learned from the project, but also so we can share with the bigger community what we've learned from the Rural Life Project. So I invite you to listen carefully. We will look forward to working with you as you decide whether or not you submit a sustainability grant. We're hoping that you all will. We look forward to working with you again, and we look forward to working shoulder to shoulder with you to see what we can accomplish in the next school year. So thank you for your attendance today. If you're watching it by recording, just be sure you contact us. Let us know that you're interested. Thank you again. Goodbye.
All righty. So as Dr. Kitsmeller mentioned, we're going to outline those 3 focus areas here shortly. We're going to look at the sustainability grant proposal together and walk through what that will look like and talk about next steps and key dates. To kick us off with that, I want to introduce our partners from Leading Edge Learning. At this time, I'll hand it over to Teresa.
Great. Thank you so much, Bethany. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you again. I know that we have lots of familiar faces from the first 2 years of Rural Life together. If you didn't join us in the spring for anything, you may have noticed Nancy and I are no longer at the Friday Institute, but we remain, of course, faithful to the Rural Life Grant. And we're really excited to be here to kick off the sustainability grant process. As Richard said, the sustainability grants are going to be focused in on 3 major focus areas this year. And so as we do the Explorers Workshop, we think it's important that we come into the proposal process with a common understanding about what we mean when we're naming these focus areas. So what I'm going to do with you right now is give you just a little bit of time and choice in exploring the different options and focus areas that you'll have as you consider and brainstorm what you want to sustain with Rural Life Sustainability Funds. And so just like this little Lego guy, that's going to be you today, and we will give you just a little bit of choice. So if you're together, I'll give you some ideas on how, if you brought a teammate, you can think about approaching this exploration process. Before we just jump in, I'm going to do a quick example from each of the 3 focus areas. So The 3 focus areas are using data to personalize learning, flexible and personalized instructional designs, and activating student agency and ownership. Underneath those umbrellas, really, we feel like within these 3 focus areas, you can hit that sweet spot of literacy instruction through personalization. And we've seen these to be high leverage areas that have really pushed some schools forward in places that the research is showing us are worth sustaining. And so with that, I'm going to do just a quick example from each and things that we've seen be successful in rural life to kind of give you a little context before you jump into your own personal exploration. So when we talk about using data to personalize learning, I think that at this point, we've talked a whole lot with you all about using this data. One of the ways we've seen it used really effectively was in this past year. There was a school who had been using data. The teachers were sitting down, using the data, reviewing the data, figuring out where their kids are at. But they made a shift this year on how they were using the data that seemed to really push things forward rapidly. And so while they had the data all year long, in January, I think as people were starting to get their footing, they started to convene as a PLC. And what they did with the data was they said, this is the instructional strategy I used. These are the results and outcomes for these different students. And they really started to dig into which pedagogical choices were actually impacting student outcomes. And so they took it a step further than just each teacher using their student data. They were then coming together, swapping strategies and pedagogies on how can I shift for each child to kind of meet their potential through the learning process. And so when we're talking about using data to personalize learning, we want to see changes in pedagogy based on the data. Flexible and personalized instructional designs. This is, I think, a major challenge. We all, as teachers, go in and have our ideas of what the lesson is going to be. And when we say flexible and personalized instruction, we don't mean just let kids choose whatever they want. But we do mean there are places where we can be flexible and offer choice within our pedagogy that still keeps that really strong instructional design underpinning and the evidence-based strategies. And so one quick example that we saw this year was a simple strategy where the school had, of course, in remote learning, had shifted to a lot more digital resources for literacy. And this was digital text. And so I'm not talking about the whole software system, but I'm talking about they were offering access to text in unique ways. Well, when they came back to face-to-face instruction, the choice they made was to maintain both and to allow teachers to make the pedagogical choices that were when and how students could choose a different form of text. So a lot of kids chose print text, but in some circumstances, they chose digital. In some, with teacher guidance, they were allowed to choose audio versions. And so keeping that strong underpinning of the teacher's guide rails and instructional design, they were able to offer choice by keeping both types of options available. So the teacher decided, not only to keep both, but also when and how they could be offered as choice. And so, some kids needed a little more guide rails and other kids already had enough self-management to push through and make some decisions on their own. Finally, the last one, activating student agency and ownership. We've seen a lot of changes this year because of COVID, right? With student agency and ownership, and all of a sudden it just became super, super important that kids had the skills, the self-management skills, and the opportunity to be kind of directors of their own learning. One of the places we saw a lot of shift in agency and ownership was the idea of long-term assignments. And so a lot of kids really struggled with getting those longer term assignments done when they were remote. And kids face-to-face still struggle with that a lot of times. But one of the mindset shifts we saw in teachers was actually working with kids who needed different pacing and helping to have that conversation back and forth about the pacing and the deadlines. So instead of saying this project is due on March 1st and you didn't do it, so you got a 0, they focused a lot more on working with the child in how can we get the learning done and at what pace can we get the learning done. And so it's not to say there were no deadlines, but it was a lot more flexible in that if we can still continue your learning, we don't want you to stop building that competency or skill because you missed the deadline. We want to find a way to support you to still build that competency. And it did start to impact the grading policies. I know we were super flexible in a lot of grading policies this year, but it really shifted to have they learned and developed that competency by having those conversations with students and giving them a little leeway. Mom has COVID, we're quarantined. Well, you might need a little more leeway in that situation. And so, but thinking about the promise of what that brought was additional learning instead of that learning is finished, we're moving on to the next topic. And so those were just really quick activators hopefully helping you to think about what we mean when we're talking about these big words and definitions. But with that high level overview, we hope that you kind of have enough thinking to do a quick self-assessment of which areas you want to dive into. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in this Explorer's Pathway into the chat for you. And then I'm going to talk you through how I want you to approach it. So everybody should click on that pathway, and I'm going to, sorry, I have a thing in my way. There we go. I'm going to put this on the screen for you. What we're going to do is we're going to give everybody the opportunity to make a copy of this pathway for themselves. So when you click on that link, it's going to ask you to make a copy of the document. And I'm going to give you just a minute to click on that link, and then I'll give you a couple minutes. And then I'll walk you through kind of how we want you to use this document. And so at this point, if you're clicking and it's struggling to make a copy, or if any settings are wrong, just let us know, drop it in the chat or jump on the mic. All right. So what we did was we set up kind of an individualized pathway, and we have it set up in a 3-step process. And so step 1 is determining your process. If you're here by yourself or with a team, just what we want you to do when you get started is take a minute to think about these 3 sentence stems and kind of place your school in a bucket. Is this a practice that's sustained in your school? Or is this an area you really think you could continue to grow? Now, you can be sustaining something and still want to grow it, which is why there's a little bucket for evidence or reflection. So on your own copy, it's going to allow you to take notes. If you're here as a team, you can choose to make 1 copy and share it with each other, so you're working together. What we want you to do with this information is choose how you want to spend your exploration time. And so if you put something as a growth area, consider whether you want to explore that area. I'm going to give you 15 minutes total, so you may be able to explore more than 1 area. Once you decide what area you're going to explore, the color matches the color of the area up here, matches the color of the area for exploration down here. And so this kind of, I don't even know what color this is, tannish, yellowish, beige color is, if you mark that as a growth area, you're going to want to explore the focus area of activating student agency and ownership. Each area has instructions for you. There's a couple of resources tagged as you should really look at these. And then there's some optional resources. The one resource I'm going to point out, in each focus area, we do have flip grids that are the rural life coaches talking about other schools and what they've seen in the schools in this area. So a great little resource. If you want to use a flip grid, the password is Niswonger. So you're going to have to enter that password for all 3 flip grids to be able to see the videos. But some great videos. Once you're done exploring, step 3 is to add your takeaways to a Jamboard. And so there's a link to the Jamboard on your pathway. And when you get there, there is one Jamboard for each focus area. So if you did area 2 using data to personalize learning, you're going to want to add your takeaways to this Jamboard. And you add to a Jamboard if you haven't before. You can click on this little sticky note to add. And it will even let you choose what color. You just type and hit save, and it'll pop a sticky note on there for you. And once you have it there, you can move it around, make it big or small. whatever you want to do. Or you can add a text box. So whichever way you want to do that. So your steps are: make a copy of this. If you have a team, decide how you're going to approach it. Do the exploration, and then add your takeaways to the Jamboard. And all of the directions are on the pathway that you just made a copy of.
Teresa, one thing can I point out about the flip grids? Like you said, they have great ideas from other Niswonger schools, from our awesome coaches. But when you go there, it makes you feel like you might need to put in your email address or that kind of thing. But yeah, just enter the password. It says enter your guest password there. So yeah, you don't need to put in all that other information. Just put in that password, and I put the password in the chat. So then that way you have it, but then you can see our coaches and hear some of their ideas.
And you just click on the video to make it play. All right. And those will stay up. So if you want, you're not going to have time to watch them all in every focus area, but they'll stay up. So you have lots of great examples available to you as you brainstorm later in the session. So with that, I am going to get a timer started. Actually, before I start the timer, are there any questions? You can jump in the chat or on the mic if you have questions. All right. You are good to go. You can mute and if you want to shut your camera so you have a little space, and I will stop talking. have about 3 minutes left for your exploration. If you have not done so yet, you can wrap up your reading or viewing in your current resource. And then I dropped a link for the Jamboard directly into the chat, and I would encourage you to go add some takeaways to the Jamboard. Just a quick reminder, there are 3 boards on the Jamboard, and the arrows at the top can help you navigate to the one that matches your focus area that you were looking at. All right. So with that, I'm going to ask, it looks like we need a couple more minutes to have time to add to the Jamboard. So if everyone would pause in their resource exploration and go ahead, jump into that Jamboard and start adding your thoughts, your takeaways. We do have a couple of guiding questions at the bottom of the pathway, but we welcome any takeaways that you have from any of the resources that you explored. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds to add any thoughts, questions, takeaways to the Jamboard. And then we're going to take a little bit of time to have folks jump on the mic or in the chat to share about what they've learned. And we can start with the Jamboard as a guide, but welcome any other thoughts that didn't maybe make it onto the Jamboard right away. All right, so as we jump in, our goal is to really kind of have some common language, understand what these focus areas are. And I think that I'm going to start on this activating student agency and ownership. It is a very big idea, right? And I love actually the sticky note that's on here, thinking about who is doing the work in the classroom. We've been saying that phrase for a long time, but putting structured supports and some professional learning behind how we can effectively build student agency to improve learning outcomes is a really important way. And I'm so interested, if anyone has a thought to add to this. I love that it says beyond the ELA classroom, because of course we know we want to focus on high quality ELA instruction, but literacy is absolutely a whole school process, and every child in every class needs to have many of these experiences to build their capacity. And so if anyone has a thought to add or comment or question on student agency, I'd love to open up the mic. And I love this new addition, the idea of productive struggle and, that learning process, the importance in learning science of letting kids build those synapses and build the myelin sheath on those neurons. So if they don't struggle, they don't build that brain capacity. And it is hard. A lot of us in education are rescuers. And so we want to go help them not to struggle. So finding that balance, and I find repeatedly, I catch myself doing this. So even conscious of it, I can definitely become that helicopter teacher or parent in the turn of a second, it happens to me. So keeping that metacognition, and especially as we're designing instruction, finding ways to build in space, time in a culture where productive struggle is welcomed and important. We understand that it's part of learning. I love that. And asking the hard questions, getting those great rigorous questions into your instruction. All right, any other thoughts, takeaways, questions on student agency and ownership?
I wanted to say, I think, again, I had put the pink post-it in there because I was reading about the helicopter teaching. And as much as I want to embrace that, I have to be completely honest, as a public school classroom teacher, I feel that we are pressured so often to meet the scores, get the scores, you've got to master this. And we are on such a time crunch, even from our district saying, here's your outline, you've got to have this amount done in such and such amount of time. And we're going to throw in all these other tests, benchmarks, and pre-ACTs. And there's so many things that hinder the classroom time that as much as I love this idea of let them struggle, let them use the time, I also feel like this little voice in the back of my head saying, we don't have that kind of time. And so I don't know how to shift the teacher's thinking, because again, especially at the secondary level, we are also isolated in our subject that I think it's hard for teachers, especially in other subject and disciplines, to say, hey, let's plan this together and let's try and, make this connection. If we can, recently I worked with our American history teacher and he and I developed this lesson together, but we both very much hovered and said, okay, this is the direction we want. But I think it's going to take a lot of coaching even for us, like, it's okay, just breathe, they're gonna get it. It's almost like being a new parent, like, what am I doing? And so again, I love that idea. And I really love Kelly Gallagher. I've read his stuff before, but I just think it's scary. If I'm being honest, it's so scary because you've got to be willing to let go and say, okay, you might fall and skin your knee, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And I mean, Megan, thank you for sharing and being so very transparent about it. I feel the same way. I taught high school math and I was like, oh, because I find myself rescuing sometimes for time, which I hadn't mentioned, but it's true. Like, I got to get moving, people. This has to happen, right? But I also heard some great ideas emerging in what you were saying about that collaboration. A lot of personalization and agency. It takes so much pre-planning time. And I can see that being a small bite for a school for a sustainability grant. How can we build and change our structures and build in time for teachers, even if it's for one unit, is our initial goal, to try to think about some action-based research. Can we try to build in deeper questions, more wait time just for this one unit, and let's see what works and what doesn't. And I think it also takes, you were talking about getting through that content, it takes a whole lot of dissecting the standards and thinking about what's the skill that is being built across all of these, and how do we have time to build that skill. Yeah, so thank you so much. I appreciate that. Does anyone have questions or anything to add to that? I see Alicia's in the chat saying, yes, 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 I know. Like, amen, that is absolutely true. It's that the pressure, not just for making the child feel better, but getting through my content. Very important as we build in plans to think about what's pushing us to do the opposite. Real pressures. Excellent. All right. Let's think about using data to personalize learning. I noticed right away on this that someone put student ownership, and it is so important. And it's hard in these focus areas to keep them apart because they're all so important together. But I think there's a couple of really, really interesting thoughts on this Jamboard. So before I just spill out my interpretation of it, I'd love to open up the mic for anyone who has thoughts, questions, or comments on something they read, something they see on the Jamboard. So when I read this Jamboard, I'm almost tempted to be a little provocative with it. You know, we talk about clear understanding of learning targets and standard-based grading, and I think it really pushes us back to kind of the thought Megan shared about, like, it is really hard to have time to standards-based grade when you have 24 to 30 kids in front of you. Thinking about them all being in different places and how much planning and flexibility that takes to get them there and build based on individual student competencies. It's a major undertaking. And I love that student ownership came up on this board, because I think as we think about who's doing the work, sticky note from the first board, it really is, it's clear right away that if you're the only one doing the work in the classroom, this is going to be impossible almost. So again, as we think and brainstorm today, and we have time for during that Q&A to do some brainstorming too, thinking about what are the scaffolds we would need to get to this place? What's the schedule we would need to get to this place? Thinking about using data to personalize learning. Is that one teacher? Is that every teacher? Is this my whole school? How are we going to do this? Yes, and Alicia, sharing those school scores and setting the goals, right, with the kids so that the kids are working towards something, getting them to understand, okay, well, this is what I haven't accomplished yet. This is what I have accomplished, and thinking about how they can grow to get there. Yes, I love that. Goal setting, and that can be a really great coachable opportunity too. And so I just want to make sure, I only have like 2 minutes left, but I want to make sure I get to this third Jamboard. Takeaways, flexible and personalized instructional design. I actually feel like, I know there's nothing on the Jamboard, so I can open it up for any thoughts anyone wants to share or questions on what do you mean when you say that? Because I feel like being flexible and designing based for personalization really does take a classroom that has a culture and the skill set for student agency, and that is being informed. The instructional design is being informed by that data. And I would say this one takes a small army, which is good because we have them in our schools to start with. But does anyone have any thoughts, takeaways, questions, or did no one get to explore this area yet?
Teresa, how would you start exploring this area? Give a first step because it's an important area. So can you just very briefly give some ideas on how you would start thinking about this? Maybe that's part of the problem here.
Sure. I think for me, and Nancy, Bethany, anybody actually on here is welcome to jump in. For me, the start of this was really getting to know my kids. You not only have to know your kids, like know what they like and are interested in, but you also have to know what they're capable of doing, when they're capable of making choices, when they need guardrails for those choices. And this goes well beyond that. We're going to take a learner profile the first week of school. It gets down to revisiting, understanding, building that over several months. And I think some of the early steps are unpacking their social emotional learning skills. Can we help build their self-awareness, their social awareness, their responsible decision-making, their self-management? Can we start to build some of that into our instruction where we're focused on content, but we're also giving them some scaffolds to start to build those skills? So it's that, for me, it's build the relationship and then gradually release responsibility. Because early in the year, I think this looks a lot different than 3 months in, right? And I know this is middle school, but you always think about that kindergarten classroom the first day of school versus 2 months in. It's like they're different kids. So that's where my brain goes, but I would love to hear from the group. Anyone have other thoughts on how to get started?
Teresa, I'll just add that I think we can also think about the environment itself, the space, and what opportunities it affords, but then also making that connection between that physical space to the actual instruction and in what ways it's flexible and personalized to tie to what you were saying, but then also flexible enough for students to make some choices, a chance for them to kind of explore things that interest them. I mean, I think there's just the physical side of the space and then also that instructional side that are worth kind of unpacking.
Well, and to your point, Bethany, just to say too, with the start of school coming and so much anticipation about being face-to-face, there's something really strong and comforting about protocol, procedures, and routines to establish a norm function that allows us off of that, based off of our students' needs, to design flexibility in that environment, because though that commonality has to be there for it to be perceived as flexible, because otherwise it's just part of the environment anyway. So it's like this commonality of what are the classroom procedures, routines, those still exist in this personalized thinking. But then on top of that, we as teachers make decisions about that flexibility based off of those individuals. And it really helps empower kids to feel like we are taking their needs into account to support that flexible environment or instructional pace or path.
Yeah. And Sarah, you speak to my heart because I'm a very structured person. And so for me, flexible environments include a lot of planning for how I can be flexible.
Yeah. And like it's behavioral too, right? So it's like this anchor of the beginning of the year, the first couple of weeks is kind of the anchor to that flexibility. This is the commonality. This is the language we speak in our environment. Those all are rooted in that practice we know. And then to become flexible off of that commonality of the environment of who we as a class are can then really ramp up the kids' belief about, ooh, things are changing from what we normally do because of the needs that I have or because of the needs of the class. And so it's even more empowering and has a strong impact on that personalized environment.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you
Teresa,
all.
one more
Go ahead, Pat.
point. I think also you can do some backward planning on this about some other of the goals you want to achieve, and then think about, can this play in this area?
Yeah.
And can, seating arrangements and what are the needs after some other goals are set?
Yeah, and modeling and thinking aloud your backwards planning with students can be a huge, huge way to build that student agency. And then you can just do some more check-ins verbally. Okay, well, what are we trying to get done? And how do you plan to do that once they start to be able to connect their learning activities to the outcomes they're seeing? So that's a whole lot. I don't know that that's a one-year goal, but it is, you can start to build that in your classroom and it will become part of your instructional routine and design eventually. All right, and with that, I am going to pass the mic to Nancy, who is going to help walk us through a little bit of considerations. If you hadn't had time, and there's lots of resources in that pathway, so I hope you'll be able to explore more later. But Nancy's going to pull out some highlights for things that we learned. They're just some strategies that we've learned have been really important to actually seeing changes in student outcomes, changes in academic engagement. All right.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And I did put a couple of a link to a website page that Teresa and I have that has some examples of learner profiles. So just some of you were asking about those, and Alicia was asking. So I put that in there just in case you didn't see it. Hopefully that was helpful. But so as we kind of shift our thinking now, you've had a little bit of a chance. I know 15 minutes wasn't long enough. And like Teresa said, there's a lot there you can continue to dig in. But maybe thinking, okay, I think I might know which area we want to dig into next year. Now, how am I going to get that done? The great thing about this, the grant and the Niswonger Foundation, is that there is funding to help you do this. But as you begin to put together your plan, which Bethany's going to preview that for you in just a few minutes, you might be thinking, okay, how am I going to do that? Well, one of the ways is you're going to probably purchase something or begin to think about how you might spend some additional funds that you have to help support this initiative or this idea that you want to move forward. And so, the great thing about a grant, in addition to the funds, is also the research that goes into it. We get to learn from one another. And so Teresa just put a link in the chat there to some ideas that, and the full kind of document there that Laura from Laura, our evaluation partner, has put together. And so you can read that if you'd like, but I'm going to give you a couple quick highlights of things and just maybe some considerations of things. So we know that having access to a lot of great literature and a lot of diverse literature is important for our students. We know that reading every day, something that they're interested in, it can help with agency as well as their interest and as well as their skill level in reading. So classroom libraries is something that's great to invest in. But if you think about classroom libraries, a strategy we want you to think about is purchasing with a plan. So we have a couple questions there that you might want to think about. So how are you going to use, just beyond buying the books, how might you use these books? What is your plan for using them or supporting the teachers in utilizing them? And so that's just a strategy to consider there is purchase with a plan as you think about investing in those classroom libraries. The next one, a lot of people, we know the importance of PLCs. And a lot of you in previous plans, people talked about utilizing PLCs. But we want you to think about this, maybe the next step further in thinking about those PLCs and really having a purpose surrounding them. And I know that sounds simple or kind of like a no-brainer, but we know that oftentimes we think that, okay, yeah, the teachers will know, or we know what to do with a PLC, but we really want to be intentional and purposeful. And so here are a couple questions that might help you as you think about that. And especially that, I want to draw note to that third question, and that third point is having those specific goals for the PLC, or have the goals for the PLC been shared with all the members. And you know, that one, we think sometimes as a leader or as a leadership team that we have, everybody is on the same page with us, but sometimes we just have to be really explicit about that. So one thing that's also not on there about PLCs is how will we make time? We need to make sure that we make time in our schedules for those PLCs. The next slide you'll see is about professional development. Professional development is a great way to help. We know that teachers, and well, we all need support in learning, right? But as we're implementing something new, that time to learn, time for professional learning is important. So you might decide to spend some funds on professional learning, but we want you to be intentional with that professional learning. And so how can you, especially in this phase, invest in professional learning that will benefit your entire staff or more than just one or two teachers? And, you know, I think we're getting back to maybe more conferences or professional learning opportunities. And so if we're going to only be able to send one or two people, be intentional about how those will spread. How will those people come back? How will we give them time to come back and share? What is our plan for that? We know that that is really important to have that plan before they go, so that way we know it will happen. But even more so, how can we invest in professional development? Maybe bringing somebody in versus sending people out. Then that way, if we bring somebody in, it can help our entire staff. And the last one here, our Niswonger coaches, what a wealth of knowledge and expertise we have in our coaches. And they've spent a lot of time, they're very familiar with the grant, very familiar with the topics, and have spent a lot of time personally investing in their own learning to better support the teachers. And so as you think about these coaches, we really want you to be focused in your coaching plan and making that plan with your coaches. I don't have that on there, but I can't stress that enough. You know, collaborating with the coach to figure out, okay, how are we going to move this work forward? What do we need to do together? And then specifically thinking about coaching cycles. We know that, and I think somebody earlier, I think it was Teresa, but maybe it was somebody else said that, you know, even with deep coaching, this is still hard. I think it was when we were talking about the work that was happening and, you know, how can we make these shifts? And so coaching cycles are a great way to help teachers make shifts in practices, but how will we identify the coaches or the teachers that the coaches will work with? And is this a collaboration? Sometimes we just say, oh, that person's going to be the person you work with. But is that person willing and ready and able to take on coaching? So just really being intentional about how do you identify the teachers that the coaches will work with, and how will you allow time for the coach and the teacher to meet? We know this time together, it isn't just about the coach going and sitting in the teacher's classroom. That's not going to make a change. The coach and the teacher need time to meet and plan. And so how can we give them that time to do that? And really, your coaches have a lot of great ideas. So working with them to make these plans together for that focus coaching. So I just gave you, Teresa, just one more thing before we go back to that previewing. Just wanted to, you know, of these 4 things, and you'll have you have access to the slides, you'll have access, and as well as the report from ANLAR. But does anybody have any questions or thoughts about any one of these 4 strategies? And as you get going on your plan, you might notice or might have questions here about some of these things. Again, please feel free to reach out to the Niswonger team, to the coaches. They will be there to support you. So just hoping that you can help to focus in on some of these things to make the both the time as well as the money that you're spending this next year really make an impact.
All righty. So now, how do we take all of this exploration and turn it into a proposal? Right. So we're going to take a look at the proposal process. And I think at this time, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. And all right, let me go back over here to the Explorers Workshop page first. Whoops. Okay, so I want to give kind of a high-level overview of what we're about to dig into. And one would be that our proposal application is a little different than last year if you looked at that, or maybe different from some other grant proposals you filled out before, in that it's a Google spreadsheet. Okay, so it's not a Word document. It's not something you type out in Word, but it's going to be a part of this Google spreadsheet. We're actually going to share it back and forth, like through Google. We'll talk about what that process will look like. But it's really a living document. It's something that serves as kind of a kickoff for your team's grant work. Again, you are going to write a proposal to us as something that this is what we want to accomplish. It'll go through that kind of review process. But if your grant is approved, then it really turns into this living, breathing document that kind of grows and develops with you as you grow and develop through the work of the grant in this coming year. So in just a moment, we're going to look at the grant proposal spreadsheet, and it has several sections to it. Don't let that overwhelm you. The different sections serve different purposes, and you are going to have support all along the way in developing your grant proposal. So with that, there's on a Google spreadsheet, if you're not familiar, you can create tabs, just like you would in Excel if you're familiar with Excel spreadsheets. But the first tab that we're going to look at is just general info about the grant. You'll see some basic information, some guidelines, the criteria for how we'll assess each proposal and make our determinations for those. Then the second tab is called Section 1, and it's the actual heart of the grant proposal. And there's two parts to it. There's some big picture planning, and then there is some more detailed planning. And that's the part that really will become that living document that I referenced a few moments ago. Then the third tab is a financial plan. This is tied to any resources you want to purchase as a part of your grant work. And then there's a tab for some review notes, and that's mostly a place where our team on the Rural Life side will take notes about your proposal. We may ask you questions and tag you in that tab. Brooke, who is our sustainability grant coach, she'll work with you to review those notes, and we'll it's a back and forth kind of tab as we work to review the proposals. And then as we work to support those proposals that we accept on into next year. And then there's a resource tab, which has lots of resources that are linked that can serve as a support for your grant work across the year. All right, so with that, let me exit out of Google Slides, and I'll shift over here to the proposal document. All right, so I'm not going to dig into like every word on the proposal. That'll just, that's just too much. But again, know that we're here to support you. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of this session. And there's one other element of support that I'll get to in just a moment, but I do want to kind of walk you through the various sections. I'm going to share also a real high level example and kind of do a think aloud for how I might think about what would go in a proposal such as this. But again, it's high level. It's not completely fleshed out, but I think it'll give you a kind of the gist of some thinking in that regard. All right, so first you'll see if you look down at the bottom, you'll see the kind of the tabs that I was referencing. So general info, section 1, section 2, the review notes, and then the resources. So you have general information about the grant. Here are the focus areas that Nancy and Teresa walked us through. So your team will choose one of those focus areas that you'll kind of dive deep into. And as a part of the sustainability grant work, there's a learning component. So we'll pull together as a sustainability grant community next year. We're brainstorming about 3 times and we'll do some kind of deep dives into these particular focus areas based on what you've chosen. So again, not that your work might not even overlap all three, just like Teresa and Nancy both said, these things really do go together. But still there'll be kind of this driving focus for your team's work, and there'll be some learning associated with that. And your coach will support you as well with that learning. So some guidelines that I want us to look at here would be that this spreadsheet serves as your team's sustainability grant proposal or application. So as I referenced before, you'll receive a link to this proposal spreadsheet, like we did with the Explorer's Pathway. It'll prompt you to make a copy, and it'll become your team's copy. And then you'll share that copy with me and our team. And then that way we can kind of work together within your grant proposal. We're asking that each team who wants to submit a proposal attend a 1-hour grant proposal workshop in June. So you can see that noted here on row 12, and you can see below that the dates, you'll attend one of these, not all three, but pick one, June 16th, 21st, or June 29th. We have one morning session, a couple afternoon sessions for you to choose from, but you'll just attend one. And you'll note here links to register for one of those workshops. And then during that workshop, we're really just going to let it be all about you, what questions you have. We're going to be a thought partner as we walk through different elements of the proposal document. We ask that you come prepared for those proposal workshops. You know, have a few ideas that you're ready to bounce around. Kind of think about what you want to accomplish as a part of your proposal as this grant work in your space next year. But again, we'll be there to thought partner with you and talk through those elements and answer any questions. And then proposals are due by July 2nd. So that's a Friday before we kick off a holiday weekend. And then our intent is to review all the proposals. And we'll use this evaluation criteria that's noted below, and I'll cover that in just a moment. We may ask a submitting team or a member from the team to do a follow-up call if we have any kind of outstanding questions, but that'll be on a kind of a case-by-case basis, and we'll just contact you via email. But our goal is to have proposals reviewed and to have teams notified by kind of the mid of July, so about the week of July 19th, because our goal is to kick off this sustainability grant work right when school kicks off. So I mentioned an evaluation criteria, and you can see that outlined at the bottom of this first tab. I won't read you these questions, but those are the questions that we'll be asking ourselves as we review your proposal. And then these little quick link criteria aligns to components over here, kind of on the right. If you were to click on this section alignment or on this word coherence, it just takes you to that part of the proposal so that you can see exactly what we'll be looking at when we are evaluating your proposal on this criteria. So for example, we're looking for alignment and coherence in your proposal. How does the proposed work align to the school or district's overarching literacy work? How does the proposal build upon the school's previous work? So on and so on. And so there are two sections in the proposal that we're going to see in just a moment that speak to that. And so if you were to click on either one of these, it would take you to that section of the proposal. So this is just meant to kind of showcase, what we're going to be thinking about when we review your proposal, and then where you can specifically find those sections in the proposal itself. All right, can somebody help me kind of keep an eye on the chat if things are kind of popping up in the chat? Thank you, Teresa. All right, I'm going to shift now to tab 2, the grant proposal itself. All right, so at the top, basic information, what's the school? Although there is a possibility that a district could submit a proposal, so that could technically say school or district name. We want some kind of lead contact person. So if it's a school, that would be the principal. If it would be a district, it would probably be a district person. And then who would be on your grant team? We highly, highly encourage this. In fact, it's really an expectation that there is a team associated with this grant proposal. So not all of the work is on this one person submitting a proposal. So that would include the principal. Let's say if you're a school, maybe a teacher leader or two. Maybe you have an instructional coach that's a part of the work at your school. So think about, who would make the most sense to be on your grant team to help you meet the goals of your proposal. Up here, also at the top, you'll see a little last updated by team yellow box. That's just for you really it's just a way to say, hey, we were last in this document. It was last updated, on the 27th of May. You might throw your initials out there. If you're part of a team, it's handy to know who's been in here last, who's been updating, when was it last updated, but use that in whatever way makes sense for you. It's, it's just there to be a resource if useful. All right, as I mentioned before, there's two parts to this section, kind of a big picture section here in part A, and then a more detailed part of your plan, which will be down here in part B. And we're going to walk through that together. I'm going to use, like I said, a high level example here. Again, it's not super fleshed out, but I just wanted to be able to give you kind of a feel for how I might think aloud around developing a proposal. So I'm going to choose an example kind of out of that using data to personalize learning bucket. Let's say that was my team's focus, and we're thinking about really leaning into the world of using data, personalized learning. How would that impact our instruction? That's where I'm going to center this example around. Again, not that it's a perfect example, but just a think aloud type example. All right, so first and foremost, we want you big picture planning to think about some of these guiding questions focused on alignment to other, work that's happening in your, alignment to your school's overarching literacy goals. And you can see this guiding question here. Think about your school's improvement plan, right, that you do with the Tennessee Department of Ed. What are your improvement goals for literacy, right? Let that be the starting place for your plan. We want the rural life work to run in concert with what you're trying to accomplish in your school. We don't want it to feel like this separate thing that's kind of pulling people in different directions. So what are your goals for literacy?
And Bethany, there's I think a relevant question in the chat for that, like thinking about the whole school. The question is it only middle grades that can be written in, or is it K-8, like whole school across levels? Great question.
We're open to considering kind of across the whole school. We might advise to kind of think about what you want to accomplish, and might you start it in the middle grades and kind of get your footing there, and then think about how that would expand to other grades. But certainly as you're developing a plan, you can be thinking with kind of that whole school in mind. Great question. All right, so you're thinking then about how whatever you're going to propose aligns to what you're already trying to accomplish as part of your school's improvement plan. You might also be thinking about ESSER funds and in what ways you're using those. And so you'd want to have your proposal, again, be in concert with what you're trying to accomplish there. In terms of focus, given your goals, what do you want to accomplish during the school year? So in my kind of think aloud example, let's say maybe we want to accomplish establishing a, we know that our goals, in our improvement plan are to really close some subgroup gaps. We see that we have lots of gaps with some of our subgroups. Our mind is on closing gaps for literacy. It's historically been a problem for us. And so our focus is going to be then to establish a rich, kind of effective data culture, right? We want to do more than just review data. We want to develop this culture for reviewing it, but then also using it to impact our instruction, to really think about our students. Our theory is that if we can really leverage data and use it to impact our instruction, that we'll see those gaps close. Right? We'll see what it's going to take to really close those persistent gaps for these subgroups. So that might be the type of thinking I might share over here in my team's response. We know in terms of need, this is a need. We see it in our historical TCAP data. We see it in our district benchmarking data. And when we talk to teachers, they see those same students struggling in their classroom, and that data also lines up with that. So we might then speak to the data in that way for that section. So for coherence, we want you to think about whatever you're proposing in terms of what are some other specific ways your school has supported improvement in literacy in the last 1 or 3 years. Is there something you kind of already have rolling that this would weave kind of very thoughtfully into or work in concert with? For example, maybe in my example here, we have PLCs that have kind of started, but to be honest, they're kind of more just another meeting than a real, highly effective functioning PLC. So we know we want to do something there to improve upon that. We've done some professional learning, let's say, around data. But again, it was more about just reviewing data versus using data. So here, you're just going to list what have you been working on or doing in terms of literacy in the last 1 or 2 years that you feel like really aligns to what you're wanting to accomplish with your proposal. Also, I want you to make note of this note here with Coherence. In terms of ELA, we've all adopted new curriculum materials. So in our minds, it makes a lot of sense, and hope that you'll consider this too, to think about your proposal in light of your new materials. For example, if I'm thinking in my proposed proposal here about data and PLCs, I know that my new curriculum materials have rhythms and routines associated with using data and personalizing instruction for students. And so I'm going to want to make that connection, especially with my ELA teachers, to do that work. And so you'll note that it says in blue down here at the bottom, we've left a space. So in this space, it'd be row 15, a space for you to even think about specifically how your proposed work might tie to your ELA instructional materials. Not that it has to be the only thing you think about, but we do think this is a wonderful opportunity, since we have these new materials, to lean into that space. All right, then the sustainability row here, this section, there's a little note in italics that says you might want to consider answering this question or these questions last, after you've completed the rest of it. And I'll tell you why, because it says, think about what you want to accomplish and then what hurdles you might have to navigate to be successful. So you really might not be able to answer that question until you've thought about the rest of your plan. And you can say, okay, well, we have these PLCs. We want to do this work with data. What might be some hurdles that we might have to navigate? What are we going to need to consider for our work this year to actually be sustained on into the next year? So whether that be funds or mindsets, some staffing considerations, maybe it's your schedule, maybe there's other competing work that you're going to want to consider, etc. What are some things that could be a hurdle, or just something, not even a hurdle in a negative way, but just something you're going to have to navigate with regard to really being successful with your plan. All right, any questions, Teresa, in the chat? I'm trying to pull that up too, regarding this part A.
Not right now.
Okay. All right, so once you have this kind of big picture planning done, then we move into part B, which is, given your school's literacy goals, where do you want to focus your team's rural life sustainability grant work and coaching support? So here's where we get a little more detailed and granular, if you will. So remember, in my kind of pretend example, I'm talking about PLCs, building a data-rich culture in my building to really use data to impact instruction. With that, I might be thinking about grouping, like student grouping. How do I use data to group students effectively in the classroom? So in this first row, I might tie that directly to my ELA resources. The focus of my work could be looking at the rhythms and routines within my curricular materials, where I'm using data, I'm grouping students, I'm thinking about those groups as dynamic and flexible based on student needs. So I might articulate here, that I'm focusing on rhythms and routines around data. Or I might put in the next row PLCs with a focus on using data. Like, you don't have to, you don't have to write an essay. It's just like, what's the real focus of the work? Then this next column where it says focus area, there's a little drop down arrow where it just populates our 3 focus areas for the sustainability grant. So then I would just choose using data to personalize learning, and it would just populate it kind of right there in that box for me. So that's just a click from the drop down. This next section is to focus our attention to the personalized learning practices that would work well in supporting what I want to accomplish. So if I said I want to focus on using data to group students, I want to think about my PLCs and getting a rich data culture built in my school, what personalized learning elements would support that? Now you'll notice there's a hyperlink in this box that pops up personalized learning practices. So here's a resource that you can use. I'm not going to read all this to you, but in essence, it's just a very high level kind of summary of one of the key resources we use within our grant, one of our RAN studies that talk about 4 pillars of personalized learning. So you'll just see some comments like students are able to make choices about the content or structure of learning, right? The structure of learning time and student grouping strategies are flexible, responsive to student needs. And in the case of grouping strategies, it's based on data. So, hey, if I know I want to really focus on data, think about these rhythms and routines that are tied to data. Some of these elements, if you will, of personalized learning align directly to what I want to work on. So I can just pull these over and say, ooh, grouping strategies driven by data. They're dynamic, they're flexible. Student data is provided to students. Maybe I want to think about how can I make sure my students understand their own data and opportunities to set learning goals. So I might pull some of the language from this tab to inform how I'm designing my sustainability grant proposal. And again, you can just steal the language straight out of there and drop it in this box if it's useful, or you can tweak it into whatever way makes sense for you. All right, next comes adult learning design. We're a learning community, right? The teams that are part of this sustainability grant work will be part of a learning community. And the way you really change practice in schools for adults is to engage in some adult learning design. So we have linked here a resource from Learning Forward, which is a professional learning organization. And I made a note here, check out paragraph 4. So I'll just model what I might do here. So again, it's talking about learning designs, professional learning that increases educator effectiveness and results for all students, integrates theories, research, and models of human learning to achieve its outcomes. So what are these learning designs? So you don't have to make this stuff up, right? There's already lots of research that shows what are some things that could support teachers and leaders in developing skills to improve student outcomes. And here's the paragraph I was talking about, paragraph 4. I'm not going to read all this to you, but look at all the ways you can engage the faculty in your buildings. Oh, one of them is analyzing student data or looking at case studies. Maybe you want to design as part of your plan, doing a book study about using data and letting that be kind of the heart and center of your PLC time. And then thinking about how do you apply what you're learning in your classroom. So then maybe you're thinking about co-teaching with peers or specialists as you work with those small groups in the classroom. So there's all sorts of examples of ways that you can engage educators in professional learning. And so we just want you to consider some of those as you are considering your proposal. Again, so for my example, where I wanted to think about establishing rich data culture in my PLCs, and adult learning design would be analyzing student data in PLCs. Right? Don't overcomplicate it. Again, you don't have to write an essay in these boxes, but we just want to see that you've got a well thought out design for how you're going to support the focus of your rural life work. All right, next comes collaboration considerations. And this is really about utilizing and leaning into and maximizing the fact that you're going to have a sustainability grant coach. So Brooke will be your coach if your team's proposal is accepted. And again, a little pop out resource that you can open and reference. And this is from a Learning Forward resource around clarifying the coach's role and maximizing the use of a coach. And these are just some guiding questions, just a one-pager. So for example, what specific work will the coach support? In this case, is the coach going to co-develop PLC agendas with your team leads in your building? Like I could see that as a fantastic way to build capacity within your building. You've got these team leads. You've got a rural life coach who's there to help build capacity within your leads to design agendas that can maximize the time in your PLCs. Who would that coach work with directly and indirectly? How often will that collaboration happen? Ooh, how and when will the team communicate the vision for this work at the school? I certainly see that as a place where the principal and the coach would come together and talk about how they're going to communicate the work of this grant back in the school. Again, so these are just some guiding questions to think about. You do not have to answer all of these questions in this little box, right? It's not about like copying, pasting, and answering them all, but we do want to see that you've kind of thought out, hey, we're gonna invite our rural life grant coach to our first faculty meeting. We're going to share a little bit about this work with our whole staff. Our coach is going to work in our PLCs and co-design agendas with our team leads. We just want to see that you've kind of thought out how you're going to maximize and leverage the use of your coach. And again, this is a living document. So you may decide to add rows to this throughout the school year as you further outline what it is you're wanting to accomplish with your work. All right, next we have progress indicators. So how are you going to know that all of this is having an impact? That's what this box is about. And once again, there's a little pop-out resource that just talks a little bit about what progress indicators are. And don't overcomplicate it. They're just incremental checkpoints to assess kind of where you are, what progress are you making, how do you know that your efforts are having an impact on what you want to accomplish. And included here is another way to think about progress indicators that might align to what you've heard from the Tennessee Department of Ed as leading and lagging measures, right? We know that something like a TCAP is lagging. You don't even get those scores until on into the next year. But we really want your progress indicators to be leading measures. What are some things that you think, ooh, if I keep an eye on this, it's going to predict maybe some future performance? We think if we keep an eye on looking at these grouping strategies in my classrooms, and am I seeing an increase in a certain subpopulation of students and their performance? Ooh, yeah, I am. I think that's going to be a predictor that those students are going to be able to close some gaps. Then on some lagging measure like a TCAP later on, or on a benchmark assessment that maybe we only have once every 9 weeks or so. And again, we are going to workshop all of this together in our workshop. You're going to have a Brooke is your coach to help you think through some of these. So just know that there's going to be lots of support in the proposal design process. And then lastly, we want you to think about your resources. What resources do you currently have to support your work, and what do you think you're going to need? And this is a springboard into maybe some purchasing requests that you and your team might make. For example, if I'm thinking about building this data-rich culture, and I'm thinking about my ELA curricular materials, but I'm also thinking about my other subject areas and their use of data, is there maybe professional learning that I think, like Nancy mentioned earlier, that I could bring to the school, and we could dig into some professional learning in that way? Maybe, at least for your ELA folks, maybe you could partner with your vendor and do some specific professional learning tied to data use and grouping strategies. Let's say you are using Amplify as your ELA curricular resources. Is there a specific training that Amplify offers that you could use your grant funds to pay for that would be really focused on using data, grouping students, differentiation, that kind of thing? So again, we want it to be targeted. It's not just a catch-all professional learning. We want it to be targeted to what you're trying to accomplish. Again, I mentioned this earlier, maybe it's a book study you want to buy for all your staff. Again, we're going to want to see evidence that it's more than you just bought people a book, but how are they using that to guide their PLCs? How are they using that to then apply that learning into their classrooms? Maybe you want to expand maybe some feature of some software you have. Maybe you currently have a subscription to software that helps you analyze data, but there's this other feature you've always wanted to get, but it just cost more money than you wanted to spend. But hey, maybe now you can expand that through some funds for the sustainability grant. And then you could think about in the future how you could own that cost on your own outside of this grant. So again, lots of things to help you think about your assessment of resources. And that takes us to our third tab, which is the financial plan. This one's a lot more just straightforward. What resources are you requesting to purchase? How will the resource be used to support your work? What's the projected cost for your resource? We do ask with your proposal that you submit an estimate or a quote of some kind. Give us an idea for how much, whatever it is you're proposing, you might spend, what it would cost. And then there's kind of a catch-all, any additional notes kind of section over here on the far right. And then you'll notice at the top, kind of a bright green box, how much are you requesting in total? All right, these other two tabs, as I mentioned, one is just a place for the Niswonger team to make some notes about what we're seeing in your proposal and some next steps. So for example, maybe you listed something and we have a question about it. We might ask a question, we might tag you or Brooke, we might tag Brooke to connect with you to get some clarifying information about something regarding your plan. So again, just a place to kind of log our review notes. And then last but not least, just some resources. No expectation, that you read all these, but they are there if you need them. And there's a place to take some notes or call out anything that's useful. And of course, you can feel free to add this in any way that feels useful to you. Although I would say there are some really neat resources in here, especially these around personalized learning practices, some look-fors in the classroom, some continuums about how personalized learning kind of develops over time in teacher practice. There's some neat things to check out. All righty. At this point, I know that was a lot to take in. And I will, Teresa, do you want to share your screen back on the slides or do you want me just to pop them back up?
You can pop them back up. There's just a couple left, right?
Yeah, just a couple. So we'll give you a chance to kind of digest that. And while I get this pulled back up. So we took a few moments to explore the proposal spreadsheet. And now let's think about some next steps. And that might also prompt some questions as well. All right, so one next step would be to access the sustainability grant proposal. And there's a copy version that I mentioned. So I don't know if Brittany or maybe someone's going to drop that in the chat for us. And it'll prompt you to make a copy, and that'll be your copy to begin brainstorming on. Also on that proposal, there is a sustainability grant informational one-pager. It's linked at the top of that first tab. So feel free to check that out, especially if you're a visual learner and you're like, woo, Bethany just rambled on for a while and I'm not, how do I take all that in? It's a great just snapshot or summary of what you've heard today. All right, you're going to want to brainstorm some ideas, right, for your team's proposal. Think about developing that grant team. Who's going to serve on your team? Start brainstorming some ideas. Maybe jump back into that Explorer's Pathway document that Nancy and Teresa shared as a grant team. Kind of do some digging, figure out what it is that you really want to accomplish with your sustainability grant proposal. Again, how that really sits nested within your school's overarching goals. Again, we don't want this to feel like one more thing. We want it to feel like it's in concert or in support of what you're already trying to accomplish with literacy in your school. All right, then you're going to RSVP. That's the next step. And remember, those RSVP links are on that proposal document on that very first tab. So once you make a copy for yourself, you'll be able to register for one of these proposal workshops. All right. Of course, here's our contact information. There's mine and Brittany's. But now we also want to just make some space for questions. Teresa, sorry,
I was just going to ask if you do you need them to share it back with you, their copy? Or does that, can
Yes,
that
I
wait?
mean, I think I kind of envision, we can get into the sharing of copies during that proposal workshop.
Okay,
So don't,
Perfect.
you know, if you want to just kind of make your copy, start brainstorming and doing some things just with your team, then we can get into the nitty gritty of sharing in our workshop. That way, if anybody has questions about how to do that or what that looks like, we can do that there.
great. So we hope that that was a helpful overview. I know it was a lot of information, and we are scheduled until 11:30 this morning. And what we wanted to do now is give you some processing time and the opportunity to kind of identify if you have specific questions about the application or the process. That will be one of our breakout room options. And if you would like to stay on and just brainstorm some ideas, toss some couple things out there, get some feedback, then that will be a second option. The third option is I need to go process this by myself for a little while and then jump into one of those June dates. And so at this point, if you want to stay with us for the next little while, 20 minutes about, you can mouse over yourself and click on those three buttons, those three dots at the top right of your box, and you'll be able to rename yourself. So if you are looking to opt into option 1, the application specific questions, you can rename yourself with a 1 before your name, just like my little example there. And if you want just a brainstorming partner, someone to toss ideas at right now, then you can jump into option 2. And option 3 is to go ahead, take your time and process on your own or with your school-based team. And so if you're selecting option 3, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that this was useful information. After you're done processing, we have some opportunities in June for you to jump in and have a deeper conversation. And if you need option 1 or 2, go ahead and rename yourself, and Nancy will pop us into the appropriate breakout space. Bethany will be in option 1, and I will be in option 2.